First, trucks filled with the vaccine leaving the Pfizer facility.
We have achieved herd immunity.
Both vaccines, you need 2 doses. Troubling news out of Alaska concerning the Pfizer vaccine.
Tens of thousands of medical workers have already been vaccinated this week.
We just don't know enough about the vaccine yet.
Distribution of a vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson is now before the FDA.
They have also taken products off the market that they approved at one point.
Do you have any doubts that we would get to this day?
The speed is unprecedented.
50% of Americans say they won't get a COVID vaccine.
Could your job make you get the shot?
All of us are ready for this pandemic to be behind us, and I don't think that's going to happen without a vaccine.
First, trucks filled with the vaccine leaving the
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to A Conversation with Friends. I'm Ivan Pitts, and I'm here with my good friend, Pastor Eric from Calvary Church.
That's right. It's always good to be with you, Pastor Ivan.
I'm excited. Today is one of those conversations that is similarly important for such a time as this. There's been so much information about the vaccine. People want to take it. Some people don't want to take it. Some people think it's good. Some people think it's bad. There's a lot of misinformation. And our goal for today is to have you to be informed. You have every right to choose to take it or not to take it. But we hope that you don't take the right to be uninformed about what is really going on. And so we have invited 2 special guests with us today, 2 friends, Dr. Roderick Seamster, who is a medical physician who's practiced in Southern California, who is educated from Harvard Medical School. And we have Dr. Michelle Law, who is out of Howard University, PhD, who is a microbiologist. And we are so excited that they're going to share with us today. Now, listen, we're going to ask real questions so we can get real answers so that you can make a real informed decision. So buckle your seatbelts and let's get ready to have a good time. So I'm going to start right away. Dr. Seamster, give us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Hello. So I'm certainly happy to be here this evening. And I'd like to thank you all for inviting me. Pastor Pitts, Pastor Wakeling, thank you for that. And also like to be here with my colleague, Dr. Michelle Law. My background includes I was educated at George Washington High School in South LA, UC Irvine undergraduate, and medical school at Harvard and School of Public Health at Harvard, and my residency at University of California, Irvine in internal medicine. And post that, I have basically worked in South LA with the Watts Healthcare Corporation, serving in the capacities as internist, chief medical officer, medical director, and then also the CEO of the organization. And now I'm currently on staff at Centinela Hospital.
So we have a practitioner who's with us with a wonderful history of experience working with people on the ground floor. And then Dr. Law, give us a little bit about your background.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Michelle Law. I am a microbiologist by training. Though I have spent probably the last 15 years in the quality and compliance space, I was trained directly by the United States Food and Drug Administration. So what I currently do is I am the person that is the voice of reason in the room. I focus on the microbiological safety of drugs, devices, and biologics, which include vaccines, to assure that the most safe product is put on the market.
Well, I'm impressed already.
Yeah, actually, I got to interrupt here real quick, Ivan, because I feel like the big question that maybe everyone out there is wondering is, how do you have friends that are this smart?
Wow.
I pay them well.
All right. Feels good that I'm your friend too, I guess. All right.
So he got jokes this week. Oh, yeah. So let's cut to the chase. And either one of you all can answer. I have 2 questions. I'm going to ask both questions, and you can take one each if you would like to. Is the vaccine safe, and why? That's the first question. And then the second question is, how did we get this vaccine so doggone quickly? I mean, you have H1N1, you have SARS, and all these things we didn't get a vaccine yet for, and all of a sudden, seems out of nowhere, we have a vaccine. And then given the history of certain people, in particular African Americans, with the Tuskegee experiment and with Henrietta Lacks and so forth and so on, we want to know, is this safe? So those are the two questions that we want to open our conversation with.
Dr. Seamster, may I address the safety issue?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as part of 21 CFR, those are the codified regulations that govern everything the FDA does. Emergency use authorization allows the FDA to consider the use of a drug in the general public during a public health emergency. The most critical criterion that that product must meet is there anything else out on the market to treat COVID-19, since that's what we're discussing tonight? The answer is no. With at least 1 million plus people dead and gone from COVID-19, this is a textbook qualification for emergency use authorization. This is used extremely sparingly, and the agency takes it literally. It is only for emergency use. So how does that work? The normal path to approval by the FDA is a long and painful and expensive process for industry. They have to go through 4 phases of review, and the first phase addresses safety. That's the priority the FDA puts on this. So with emergency use, rather than going through steps 1 through 4, commercial and approval onto the market in tandem, emergency use allows a company to say, okay, FDA, here's phase 1 safety information. Here's phase 2 safety and efficacy information. Here's phase 3 safety and efficacy information. Does the product do what it says it's going to do? Have you met your clinical endpoints, which in this case is 85, 90% efficacy? And again, is it safe? So once we get to stage 3, the FDA says there's a global pandemic, so we will allow you to use this in the public because at this point we are reasonably assured of safety and efficacy, while we keep one eye on what's going on in the public and how they're reacting to this vaccine, and the other eye on your submission. So in a way, the FDA is getting information in real time about the safety monitoring and efficacy monitoring of this vaccine. Please be assured, emergency use does not mean corners were cut. Emergency use does not mean it was a quick, cursory review. It was thoroughly reviewed. It got the priority over everything else on everybody's desk. It just means the review process is done in parallel while the vaccine is being used in the public.
Thank you so much. Dr. Seamster.
Yeah, so, you may have heard terms also about warp speed, and that could probably connote, when one hears that the thinking, as Dr. Law said, maybe that corners were cut. Corners were not cut, and they did go through all the steps, and the warp speed just basically meant that a lot of roadblocks were taken out of the way so that they could make this a priority and work on it, collectively, in order to get at it in a safe way so that it would be effective and work. And as you know, recently, the 3rd vaccine that has been approved through that process has come out, and that's the Johnson & Johnson, the Janssen vaccine. And as the last time that we spoke here at Second Baptist, we only had 2, which was about, 3 weeks ago. We had that talk. And this new one is a viral vector vaccine, and it uses the adenovirus, which is used. It's basically a virus that causes the common cold. And keep in mind that none of these vaccines are live, and they do not have material in them that will cause you harm in that regard as it being live. This particular one with Johnson & Johnson is a DNA spike protein type vaccine. It's administered in a single dose, and it's authorized for 18 years and older. It does not cause you to have COVID, as I said. And as was mentioned earlier, the data did show for this particular vaccine that in general, of all the studies that were done, that it was 66% effective at preventing symptomatic disease, 85% at preventing severe disease, and 100% against hospitalization and death. And then specifically for the United States, it was 74% effective. And as you recall, we spoke about variants. And so if you look at Latin America, 65% effective and 52% in South Africa. And also of note, in those studies as well, it was found that the variants sequenced in South Africa was 94% in those tests, and then in Brazil 69%, and that's very high. So that means there's a large part of the variants were there. And again, like the other two, the mRNAs that we spoke about before, the symptoms included pain at the injection site, fatigue, some headache, and then muscle pain. It's all similar from the other two. And this one in particular, it requires just basic refrigeration, so they can really get that out and about in areas that it may be needed. And some of the advantages of this particular one by Johnson & Johnson, the single-dose vaccine, it's a single-dose vaccine, and then also there's really no worry with storage, and it can get to remote sites. So from a world focused on the pandemic, that would be important.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful when it comes to both safety and efficacy, that just hearing a lot of those statistics. And again, thank you so much for being with us here. And I think that another area, I know in my community, like a concern, we're relatively conservative. You've got a lot of different viewpoints going around, and even conspiracy theories and all of that. And so concerns about all of those different types, but because I think then we get into this ethical realm. And so even I know a big concern in my community, and you tend to see people make these big, broad accusations sort of on social media and things like that, and with seeming, authority, but it's just, one of your friends on Facebook. But with that, some people have put these thoughts out of, hey, do these vaccines come from aborted fetal cells? And so do we have, as we're a pro-life church, we really care about these sorts of issues, and do we have a concern when it comes to that?
It's an excellent question. Thank you.
Vaccines, in order to be used, also go under ethical review. These vaccines were not developed from aborted fetal cells. Moderna and I can't recall the other vaccine, the first two, those are mRNA vaccines. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is a viral vector using the adenovirus. However, vaccines are often tested in cell lines. They are not like bacteria. You can't streak them across an agar plate and have them grow. That's what makes viruses a lot different from bacteria in the lab. They are obligate intercellular parasites. So they are obliged to live and exist inside of live cells. So in order to culture them in the laboratory, you need a cell line. Human embryonic cell lines are not fetal tissue. However, they are derived from donated tissue from decades ago. So you go through generations, literally thousands of generations of splitting these cell lines until you're very far removed from the donor. These cells are no longer taken, for example, like Henrietta Lacks cells, without the patient's knowledge. By law, codified in 21 CFR, there has to be informed consent. So whatever cell lines have been propagated from donations from decades ago had the permission of the patient. But are the vaccines, to circle back around, sorry about babbling, for your question whether or not these vaccines come from fetal cell lines or fetal tissues? No.
Okay, that's helpful. No, that's very helpful. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Ivan. You can feel free to ask your next question.
Dr. Seamster, did you want to jump in, or are we?
No,
okay?
That's fine. That was an excellent answer. The answer is no. Yes.
Great. Dr. Fauci talked about people of color and those with underlying conditions were represented in the vaccine trials. One of the questions we've gotten from our online community, and thank you for being with us and asking questions, is why does that matter? Why does it matter that you have multiple ethnical backgrounds and people with different underlying conditions? Why is that important in developing a vaccine?
Because the immune response is genetically programmed. What I mean by that is, Pastor Pitts, if you were to get the flu, for example, it might lay you out flat. If I get the same flu, I might be okay, spike a fever or whatnot. It isn't, because the immune response is genetically programmed. It's individual. And so it is important that clinical studies are diversified, because certain individuals, certain groups of individuals may respond differently. This is not to say one group is lesser than the other. It's just the immune response might be different. And so it is extremely important to diversify clinical trials. I can give you a really quick example using a medical device, artificial hips, when I was at the FDA. There were a lot of issues with artificial hip placements, particularly in women. And it was because the engineering staff was not diverse. It didn't include any women. So they didn't consider, when developing these devices, that a woman's pelvis sits wider and at a different angle to accommodate childbirth. That wasn't considered in the development of these medical devices. So they had to go back to the drawing board and reconsider that. So the same is true with drug development and vaccine development. It is extremely important that the community does their part to diversify these clinical trials. But I do recognize that there's a trust issue there, particularly in communities of color.
Can you help us just even with maybe some more details of, like, do you think this is a thing we're going to have to do annually? Or is this a one-time shot, or are we going to have to go through all this again next year?
Well, I'll just start on that. It's not totally clear exactly what needs to happen next regarding whether or not we need to get the second shot or boosters or what have you post these shots, and what will happen with the variants that are out there now, whether or not we need a booster for variants. And it's not known yet, because we have to kind of go through it, because this is certainly new, being that this is a novel virus and we just don't know just yet. Mm-hmm. However, all that's being tracked and being looked at to make sure that we will know when it comes, to at least a year from now, that we will know a lot more exactly what it is that we need to do. And just to add to the previous question, it's been known over time that communities have been disproportionately impacted within populations, such as the older adults, people with multiple pre-existing conditions, and minorities. And it was important for these trials to have, those groups within the studies. And so there was a lot of outreach through churches and community organizations, colleges, and other areas in order to make sure that we did hit the mark on that. And even when you look at warp speed and some of the things that did come out of it, was that, those were some of the key elements of the work that was being done, that the studies needed to include those groups, and that did happen. So that's one thing to note also.
That's good. One other question I had too about just side effects, or especially with long-term effects. I've never really been able to understand how with something like this, how can we understand the long-term effects if it's only been, if it's only been short term. So how can we have a sense of assurance, or what would you speak to us about feeling a sense of assurance that it's the right decision to get the vaccine?
And I want to add to that. Sure. This goes back to Dr. Law, what you talked about, a trust issue. And I think a lot of the hesitation is around trust. Mm-hmm. And so as you're answering Eric's question, think about it from a factor of trust.
You're talking about long-term effects from the vaccine.
Correct.
Right.
As Dr. Seamster said, those are being monitored in real time. This is a novel virus. We simply cannot answer all the questions about it at this time. We're learning about it in real time. I've heard comments, certainly not coming out of SBC, but just in general about, well, they don't know what they're doing. They keep changing direction. And so what the world is seeing is what scientists and clinicians have seen since day one. You're seeing the scientific method play out. This is the scientific method in real time. We recognize it because we see it all the time. But that's what the community is just getting exposed to. Whether or not, is it safe? During the process of emergency use authorization, like I said, the review process is going in real time. How can we prevent? So to answer your question, how can we prevent another Tuskegee from happening? Is that your question, Pastor Pitts?
Yeah, I don't know if it's another Tuskegee, but just the residue and the aftertaste of Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks is still in the air.
Right.
And so it's really about people in our communities, and this is in Eric's community and in our communities. We're saying COVID is bad. People are dying. But will I die or have something worse happen to me, live with modality that is a result of me trying to prevent from getting COVID by getting the vaccines? And we're saying, we're asking you, is it a gamble?
No, I don't. It's not a gamble. All I can say is, born out of those incidents like Tuskegee, born out of those tragedies like Tuskegee, and all the things that weren't as public as Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks, what came out of that are regulations and checks, if you will, in place, legal checks in place to promote safety and to protect the public and prevent that from happening again. For example, I just read on the FDA website a warning letter that the FDA issued to a principal, a clinician who was conducting a COVID-19 vaccine study. She didn't go before the FDA and file an investigative new drug application. All of these things that they nailed her on, those are the stopcocks that are in place to promote safety. That's where I struggle, to be honest with Pastor Pitts, is I struggle with defending the science against what people are hearing all around. I struggle with convincing the community to trust again. I understand there's a trust issue. I am mindful of that. It is justified. But at some point, I think we've got to, when we're seeing bodies drop all around us, at some point, I believe we have to climb out on that limb and trust. And these are conversations that are happening all over the country. I have other clinical friends that are giving these same discussions to church communities. How do we build a trust? I have friends who are doctors that get on Facebook and say, okay, I got the first shot, and they document their progress of the vaccination before their timeline. I have a soror who's a clinician, and she's pregnant, and she got the vaccine, and so she's going through that hoop to try and document that progress of vaccination before her timeline. So I don't, to be very transparent, I don't know what else to say to, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I don't know what else to say to promote any more trust in the community, other than we are here. I'm here, and Dr. Seamster is here, and there are tons of us in the clinical community and in the regulatory agencies, and I just feel like we're begging people to trust us, and it's hard, Pastor Pitts, because when you get comments, again, I've just heard these comments in general, when you get comments like, well, you're in the back pocket of pharma,
Right.
you're part of the devil's army.
Right.
How do you want me to, I respond to the first one by saying, well, if you mean they pay my salary, yes, and I'm not cheap. But if the community wants to know where I stand on safety, I've been fired before because I refused to stand down for a very well-known company who wanted to put a product on the market that had a bioburden that I would equivalent to dirt. It was equivalent to dirt, and they wanted to put it on the market and expose dialysis patients to this. I was threatened. I wouldn't stand down. They fired me. That's how committed I am to safety. There are plenty of us, including Dr. Seamster, who are in this arena where I don't know about him, but I don't know what else to say to get people to feel more comfortable, other than I understand the mistrust.
Yeah, I can just add that, I think it's important to really kind of just, be clear about, what I think is happening here is that certainly, there's a history of wrongdoing. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Mm-hmm. There's a history of that. And then it's how the history occurred and what occurred during that time. If you look at Tuskegee, for example, the issues wasn't that the men had syphilis. The issue was that they weren't provided the treatment. And so that's in the history. So we have to deal with that and make sure that we talk about it. So we have to be able to have a conversation. So thank you all for doing, having this forum. But so we need to talk about that. But that was then, that was, back at that time, back in 1930 through the 70s. But then when you look further ahead, then you have to look at today's time and, what's going on now, and just make sure that, as individuals, as communities, as a population, we have to do better at showing what we're doing, telling the truth about what we're doing.
That's a good point.
But also make sure that we have actions around what is going on now. So Tuskegee was back then, but now So what's going on today that needs to be addressed? And so we need to begin to do better at addressing those issues that impact us today. And so when you look at the vaccine, certainly we need the vaccine because, 2 weeks ago, we just, looked at in this country, over 500,000 died from COVID. And we have to really make sure that we're able to tell that story and continue to build trust. We have to continue to communicate and be more effective at doing that. We have to collaborate.
Absolutely.
And we have to do things in the public.
Right.
And make sure
that's not something the FDA is good about at all. They're not, admittedly, the FDA is not good about pulling away that veil and helping the public try and understand, well, what is emergency use authorization? They just hear, oh, it went from A to Z. They must have cut corners. They must have did this. No, that's not what happened at all. It's codified. Exceptional circumstances trigger emergency use. A global pandemic where 1 million+ people are dead and more are dying qualifies for emergency use.
Yeah. And so if you look at, what's happening now, I know, but I think we all, it should, and that's why we have in the forum that should be aware of some of the things that will help us understand, what's happening here. And it's clear that you need to know, as all the questions you've been asking around safety and, is it safe? Just, yes. And so, what helps us to get there is to continue to communicate and know what's happening, because some things really do have to happen, quote unquote, behind the scenes, but it needs to be reported out. And that does occur. If you look at the advisory committee on immunization practices, they've been convening, since the beginning and just having meetings, weekly, and then and looking at, what's going on and looking at the COVID-19 vaccines, all of them, and including the one that just went through. So there's a work group that also is a part of that. And then also who's on these work groups, and just making sure that they comprise of, all the types of experts that you would want on there: infectious disease, vaccinology, vaccine safety people, public health, people around that deals with ethics, and just make sure that they're meeting enough to be able to discuss all the things that needs to be discussed, and that they're surveilling the data that is going on now. That as we, as the pastor asked, what about, the future of this? And so that surveillance is ongoing, and that you open up to the public to be able to report whatever they find, whatever they see, and that's still there. And that they continue to look at the efficacy of this and the safety, and look at the numbers to make sure that it's happening. Absolutely. And so on these committees, it's important that it is that way, and that there's a cross section of people geographically on there, academically, ethnicity, and race. And so, we've been looking at that and found that to be substantial and totally different than, when we look at history and then where we are now, and just make sure that we continue to push that type of change. And so, and that I can say is happening, and we just need to do better.
So I want to say thank you. These are tough questions, and you're not even responsible for the answers, but yet your passion and your commitment to the community and public health is just exemplary. And I just want to pause and say thank you. And as Eric and I are looking at the comments in the chat space, people are really feeling blessed and encouraged by your work. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
But some of the things that are popping up, and just a free footnote, for those who may not be aware of this Tuskegee experiment, you should Google it and look it up, Tuskegee experiment, syphilis, and you will be horrified by what you may find. And that the stench of that is still in the air of the Black community. Also, I want to say that there's been a lot of questions on the chat about side effects and long-term side effects of the vaccine. Have you all heard of any side effects? And do you anticipate in the future long term, what are some of the side effects from the vaccine? And we know that Moderna and Pfizer are similar, but Johnson & Johnson is a different kind of vaccine. So long-term effects from those vaccines.
I don't know about Dr. Seamster, but I haven't heard of any side effects that aren't common to all vaccines. Headache, possible soreness at the site of injection. You might get some body aches. What's happening? It's your immune response reacting to the vaccine. It's your immune response doing exactly what it should do. I understand the 2 mRNA vaccines where you have to get a second dose. I'm told it has a kick to it, fatigue, more body aches, headaches, and things of that nature. Again, that's the memory part of your immune response, recognizing the second dose from the first one, and it just ramps up your response to the second dose. Now, Johnson & Johnson is a different vaccine, 1 dose. It's an adenovirus vector. I'm not sure why they chose the viral vector instead of, say, the mRNA, but from the science perspective, ideally, you want the vaccine to be the whole viral molecule. Why? Because it promotes the strongest immunological response. As Dr. Seamster said a few minutes back, the virus is attenuated, which means they fix it so that it cannot reproduce. So it will not cause infection. But the immune system doesn't know that. It just sees not self and does what it's supposed to do.
I had one other question that's something I'm hearing in circles I run in, and it sounds a little more conspiracy theory-ish, but I think it's good to get these out there and just to be able to hear some responses to them. But it's kind of along the lines of, is this just another way for the government to control us? And maybe there's even some sort of microchip or something, people throw around the Bill Gates kind of accusations. He's trying to get us all. And then as a runner and cyclist myself, I've said, well, it's fine as long as I get the data. But and that's just a joke. I'm sorry, guys. But any thoughts on some of that when it comes to there's a microchip or they're tracking you or all that?
I find it funny in an ironic way that people think that there's a microchip or some type of tracking device in a vaccine when everyone walks around with an iPhone or an Android and you can be tracked that way. So I don't understand. I mean, no, there's no microchip.
No.
Therefore, it has one in it. That's not what you're saying.
The vaccine does not have a microchip in it.
There we go. There we go.
No. It does not have one in it.
We're also getting a lot of questions from the chat around underlying issues. Some of the questions is it advisable to take the vaccine, one versus the other, if you have underlying issues, i.e. former cancer patient or high blood pressure, diabetes, and things of that nature? And will it impact us if we did not take it with those underlying conditions?
Well, I would just say that COVID does not discriminate at all. Mm-hmm. And if you can take it, you certainly should. If you do have, a certain ailment, it would be wise that you had a question about. It would be wise that you spoke with your primary care physician. And if you do not have a primary care physician, you can call in and speak to someone regarding the vaccine itself. But it is recommended, under, most circumstances, and there would only be a few where it would not be. And you should have those conversations, with the healthcare provider regarding that. But it is recommended generally for everyone to take. And it's important that we all do take the vaccine, again, because it does not discriminate, and it certainly can be lethal.
So I want to be clear, and I think you answered it, but I want to repeat it for our audience. If you have underlying issues, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, you're a former cancer patient, you should be safe taking it, but check with your primary care physician. If you don't have a primary care physician, you can also find information via many of the hotlines that are available to us. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if you are seeking to become a patient, you certainly can call into there are community health centers, around, the nation, certainly here in Orange County, South LA, and so forth, that you can directly call in, despite ability around, insurance or pay or what have you, to do that. And then also the vaccines themselves, there should be no fee associated with them at all. So that is correct. And the reason that it's important to speak to someone is that, timing of taking the vaccine may be of import. And so, if you do have a condition that may be, it may be a certain time that you should take the vaccine based on your particular condition. And so that's why it's important.
Okay. I see this question from Thelma Douglas. Can we pop that up on the screen? It's interesting, I think, of just, so my church is opening back up. Although I've had both vaccines, I continue to wear my mask. What's my risk of exposure to COVID? Should I come in contact with someone who's infected? So, like, is this a free pass? Are we good? What's that?
Great question.
Can you talk through that question a little bit?
The vaccine is not a free pass to not wear a mask. You should continue to wear your mask. Actually, it might be wise with the variants to even double mask. So it's really your comfort level. Your risk of exposure to COVID, should you come into contact with someone who is infected, I think depends on who is masked and who is not. If you're both masked, the risk is at a minimum. If one of you if only one of you is masked, it's a little higher. And then you don't want to be in a situation where neither one of you is masked.
Right, but but I think it's more if you're vaccinated, how
we're still learning about.
Can you feel? Not like masking, spreading.
Well,
but
I understand. We're still learning about the antibody profiles of these vaccines. So some people are developing antibodies. Sometimes they're transient. They're here and they're gone. We're still learning about whether or not they're protective or not, meaning do they prevent reinfection? So again, this is a novel virus. We're still learning about the profiles. That's not something we have a lot of information on right now.
Yeah, and so it's important that we do those things. And again, as Dr. Law said, that everybody that's been vaccinated, they should continue to follow all the guidance that's out there now, including washing your hands, wearing a mask, staying the physical distancing, avoiding crowds, and following the travel guidance, and following any guidance that you may have at your workplace or school. And we should continue to practice healthy habits. We should make sure that we get enough sleep, be physically active, manage our stress, drink plenty of fluids, and eat a nutritious diet ongoing. And that just is just a good practice to continuously do that. Mm-hmm. And if you have had COVID, another thing also, if you have had COVID, you still need to get the vaccine as well. And so certainly, follow the guidance on that in terms of getting the vaccine. So it's important that we do that.
But and then it's just remembering everything you said at the beginning, right? Though, about the reasons why you take the vaccine, because the results had the so many fewer hospitalizations and deaths and all of that. It's for your personal safety, correct?
Correct. And you've all heard this term called herd immunity also. And that's when enough Americans, have immunity against the virus to stop it from spreading within the population. And it's estimated right now, if you look at the numbers, is roughly about 15% of the people in the United States received at least one dose of the vaccine, and which equates to about 7.7%, having gotten the 2 doses. And so the public health has basically suggested, and these numbers, can be shorter or wider range. And I'll just say here for the discussion purposes that, 80 to 85% of the Americans would need to be vaccinated for the country to achieve herd immunity. So 80 to 85%. And if there's only 350 million people in this nation, then, certainly, there's a ways to go. And we've heard, throughout the week that there's more vaccine that has been ordered in order for us to get there a lot sooner than we thought in July. But maybe by May, the vaccine should be available. And then the hope and the intent is that, a lot of people are vaccinated. But the other piece to this is that we've spoken about, 18 and above. There's also, I guess 16 and above if you look at the Pfizer vaccine. But if you look at 16 and under, then there are studies going on now that's looking at what can happen in our kids. And so if you speak of herd immunity, that population has to be addressed also if you just look at numbers in general. And so it's extremely important that we understand that with what has occurred over the past year is tremendous in terms of what has happened to families and individuals. But also at the same time, it has been tremendous in terms of the work that has gone on in order to help to find a solution to this pandemic. And and I can only just not say enough, how proud I am to certainly be on the call, but for you putting the call on, and that it's important for us to listen to each other around this and make sure that we're able to come together, with an understanding of what's happening here and how we're going to need to lean on each other in order to make this all work. And that at some point, to bring up is that we're going to have to involve our kids in this too, as we go forward. And so that piece is going to be there as well.
So this is, I can't tell you how valuable this has been for us. And I want to delve a little bit into the area that might be a little bit outside of your expertise, but you talked about children, and they have not come up with a vaccine as of yet. Do you know where they are with that, and what age ranges are they working on? So that's one question. And two, we have a teacher who posted, it just moved. Well, she's going to put it up there. There it is. Says children aren't being vaccinated yet. What is the risk to teachers with a school preparing to reopen? So are teachers going to be safe since there's no vaccine? So there's two questions. Are they working on a vaccine for children, and what are the ages and the timeline? And then are teachers at risk?
I haven't seen anything in the literature or on FDA that they're working on a vaccine that is specifically targeted for the pediatric population. I'm not sure. Dr. Seamster, can you speak to that?
So there's certainly been discussions, but I'm not aware of any work and where they are on that at this point. But it's going to be, again, I said that it's going to be extremely important, as we go forward. And we have to just maintain open communication lines on where that is and where we are and what that entails. And certainly in this state, California, that has been open to have teachers be able to, if you will, get in the line to be vaccinated. So that is occurring. And so, as you look at a continuum, certainly having the vaccine, push you in a better position, obviously, than not. And there has been, reports saying that, the exposure relative to teaching and the teacher and the students and how transmission occurs. Um, um, but I can just only speak anecdotally that the more that we can do in that relationship, the better.
I'm not sure why teachers weren't in group 1A to begin with.
Yeah.
So who do I call to get them in the group 1A?
Well, they're in the group now. If you look at it,
They are now.
I believe they're getting vaccinated now, but it doesn't make sense to me, the push to open schools, and we want to do so safely. So why are teachers just now getting vaccinated?
Right. Well, as the husband of a high school teacher whose school has been open since August, I'm happy that she can be getting her vaccine soon here. But she's also the school's done well. So the school's done really well. I mean, it's not like just school open like it used to be. It's with good safety practices, social distancing, masks, all that. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. What would you say to those who, even after being informed or after listening to something like this, they still refuse to take it? How would you recommend even having a conversation like that with someone, or what would you, someone in your shoes and your expertise, hope to say to someone that still would refuse?
Yeah, I mean, it's if there's reluctance to get the vaccine, and there's certainly reasons for that, and I think the approach to that is to really just have an open ear and a continued discussion around such reluctance, and making sure that questions have been answered, and that you're able to have that dialogue in order to make sure that the information is there. Because science is one thing. I think science is one thing. Healthcare and how you care for someone is another thing. Science, certainly they say follow the science, and science is truth, and so forth. And then there's the individual, there's the patient, or if you want to think of it in my practice or what have you. And so there has to be care in between all of that. So science and the individual has to meet somewhere. And you just continue to have an open dialogue in order to really add to that conversation, so that you can create a level of comfort. And we spoke about this tonight. In that is a whole lot of things. There's history in there. There's trust in there. There's today in there around, the healthcare system that we do have. And so there's in there, issues with maybe equity, and all of that's in that. And so it's gonna require us to continue to talk about it, to speak about it, and continue to inform. Certainly truth and facts are one thing, but we have to continue to focus on the individuals around that.
I want to jump in. There's two questions that have caught my attention. One question is, please respond to the following question. They're going to put it up for me. Regarding those who have had no reaction to the vaccine, does that mean that the vaccine is not working in them? And the background to that question is, the second shot has given many people a reaction because it means the first shot has worked. So is the opposite true?
No, the opposite is not true. The immune response is individualized, and some people handle the vaccine better than others. But to say if you don't have headaches and body aches, it's not working, that's not true. That's not true.
So the second question,
some people just tolerate it better.
Yeah. So it's really more of an individual response. Like some people lay flat on their face when they have the flu, and some people could get a runny nose and can keep going.
And that's it. Yeah.
Okay, great. The second question is, and I'm gonna try my best to pronounce this word correctly. I have heard rumors about the CDC preventing doctors from prescribing
hydroxychloroquine to COVID patients because it actually,
COVID patient. Oh, you can see it.
and
Good. I don't
some
have to read it.
doctors have been stripped of their licenses for doing so. Oof.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was Dwayne who asked that. By the way, he's supposed to be our friend.
That's part of the second half of Dwayne's question is also ties into this trust issue. A lot of folks think there's a cure for cancer, but the pharmaceutical companies are sitting on it, and so that's not true. I will let Dr. Seamster, as the clinician, speak to prescribing hydroxychloroquine. There's some serious adverse events to that, and I can't recall what they are, so I will yield to him to address that one.
Yeah, certainly hydroxychloroquine is used in certain ailments, but as it relates to COVID, when COVID first, came to us back in December, January, and so on, it was important for us to do all we could to really reach a point where we could really help save our patients. And so hydroxychloroquine was out, and there was a thought that it was able to make a difference, but studies later showed and proved that it was not effective, and so it was taken off for that reason, and that it was not effective in making the claims that it did, and that it mitigated illness and so forth. So that was not the case, and that's why it was removed. So the initial notion was anecdotal, that people thought they saw something, but that's why you do the studies to really see if it makes a difference. And the studies were done, and they disproved that to be the case for that.
I want to, as we kind of close this round, Eric and I will spend the last few minutes debriefing and kind of thinking about what we've heard, what was important, and things of that nature. I think one of the biggest challenges is finding legitimate and credible sources and information. Do you have websites that we should really lean towards that are credible? Obviously, the CDC, obviously county health websites and things of that nature. Is there something other than the CDC and are the local health departments that we can get credible information that we can understand, on a real simple level?
www.fda.gov is the public domain for the FDA's website, and they have a whole section of information specifically for COVID-19 and the vaccination process and the emergency use authorization process. I think they do a relatively good job about kind of making it plain for the general public, so that they can remove that veil that hinders understanding of what's going on with the vaccine and the regulatory process. But I will say, Pastor, I will add that it's in my decades-long career as a scientist, it seems like the last 5, particularly in the last presidential administration, this is the first time in my entire career where scientists have been routinely put on the defense, and it's, we're looked at as charlatans and witches and magicians, and this is the first time ever in my career where it seems like the propaganda and the conspiracy theories take root so much quicker than the facts do. And I don't know if it's that as scientists, we're really not, typically at the doctorate level, we're not really trained on how to communicate the science well. It's just that, I had a unique mentor at Cal State Fullerton who told me it wasn't good enough to know the science. I had to be able to communicate it to all audiences. And a lot of scientists aren't taught that. So I think that's problematic. And we're not sensitive, as Dr. Seamster said, to the intersection of science and human factors and human health, which, by the way, the FDA has an office of human factors. All of that is considered when in drug development and vaccine development.
I want to say thank you both for really giving us a lot to think about, and it's been so helpful. Will you all who are with us online give them a round of applause, a high five, a virtual amen, because this has been great. There are also other organizations in Orange County that are giving information. The Links and the local Boulay are having a forum very similar to this coming up, I believe, tomorrow. And so there are others who are sharing information. You can't be over-informed. Remember, you have the right to choose not to get the vaccine, but you don't have the right to be ignorant about the facts. Please exercise your right to be informed. Thank you all so much. If you all would just hang with us for a few more moments, Pastor Eric and I will close out with some final thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Law and Dr. Seamster. We really appreciate your expertise, and you were able to communicate it in a way that we understood what you were saying. so well done.
Thank you all.
And please look at the comments, Dr. Law and Dr. Seamster. You all really did an outstanding job for us today. We owe you a debt of gratitude.
It is my hope. It is certainly my prayer that something I said would assure someone, would lessen any concerns or fears that they may have. This virus terrifies me, and I don't want to lose any of you. And so, yes, make your decision. If you get the vaccine, I love you. If you don't get the vaccine, I love you anyway. But just make an informed decision. COVID-19 in general has taken 1 year off of the general life expectancy. COVID-19 virus is a gangster, and it terrifies me. And I don't want to see anyone get sick. Again, like Pastor Pitt said, if just make an informed decision, whatever you choose.
Indeed. And I'll just end with, we're crossing the last mile. We need to continue to build trust. We need to continue to manage operations well. We need to communicate more effectively, and we need to collaborate with our public and private entities to make sure that we put our arms around this thing and make a difference.
Thank you.
Doc, when you all send your copay, send it to Calvary Church on Tustin. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so
thank you. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
All right, so you and I can talk a little bit about this. We aren't experts. We aren't pharmaceutical microbiologists, but we can play one on the radio sometimes.
Stayed at Holiday Inn last night, right?
Exactly. But I don't know. Hard hitting question. Are you going to get the virus? I mean, are you going to? I'm paid to speak for a living. Okay, so are you going to get the vaccine?
I am getting the vaccine. I've already had one shot.
Okay.
And I get my second shot next week. So I will be fully vaccinated, and I was able to get the Moderna. How about you?
I have not received it yet, but I am willing. So I'd like to. So when it's my turn, I'll definitely be going for that. And I think something even kind of hit me maybe emotionally, like to realize, because I'll be honest, like over the summer when they first started, we're kind of talking about this coming out. I was like, well, maybe it's good I'm at the age I am where I'm going to probably be getting it last or something, you know, or later. And you know, I can kind of see what happens to everybody else first. You know, I had a little bit of that kind of reaction.
Right,
and then, but then, you know, that's been kind of changing as I've read studies about it, or I've seen some of the results. But then even with my father, who's 88 years old, I especially remember like just wanting him to get to the front of that line as quickly as possible. And he's had both of his shots, and I feel that sense of a little bit of relief from that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, same with my 82-year-old mother, right? Wanted her to get it. My siblings and I struggled with seeing her and visiting her. My children are still involved in work and in sports. And when she would come over, we were concerned about what we would do. So we wanted her to get the shots as quickly as possible. But I want to share just a short story. I had 2 funerals in 1 week. One was on a Tuesday and one was on a Saturday. And one was outside and one was inside. And neither funeral had more than 30 people. And at both of those funerals, we were masked, we were socially distant. And one young lady at the first funeral was really taken over by emotions and just came and ran and grabbed me. I mean, she's crying and she just buries her head right in my chest. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, you know, she has tears coming out of her eyes and she's grabbing me. And so I didn't freak out too much because I had a jacket on. Well, Saturday, the same thing happened with a young man who lost his brother, and he got emotional and he grabs me and he starts crying, right? And when he leaves me, my shirt is wet. And I'm like, I have to do something. I have to protect myself. I have children. I have a mother. I have people I interact with. And so that really pressed me, along with information, having conversations like this to help me feel much better about getting the vaccine.
Yeah. And, you know, our church is, we both are kind of just taking slightly different approaches. Like we've both been, I think, relatively like careful and responsible when it comes to coronavirus. But like this Sunday, we're opening up indoors, in person, 25%, about that kind of rate. And so, you know, we've been open outdoors. So we just have a area that's been, you know, able for us to meet in a decent amount of people outdoors. So I've just been around all these people like a lot. Right. And so you kind of have this sense of, as a pastor, it's like, hey, are we essential workers too? Right.
Right. Yeah. We are essential workers.
But yeah, we're around people, but I'm just hopeful that at least now, if majority of especially the older, more vulnerable people in my church have had a chance to get the vaccine, they can feel a lot more safe and assured coming to church.
I agree.
Yeah.
A couple things I think is important as we kind of close this segment. I feel like this has been part of the responsibility of the church. The church, not only as we've had conversations about race, we need to take the forefront in bridging racial divides and gaps, but we also need to be at the forefront with public health issues and initiatives and things of that nature, and helping our people to be informed. So I think that is a requirement, a responsibility. Who much is given, much is required, a requirement of us. And I was touched by a couple things. There's some things that we can do. Dr. Seamster talked about managing stress and getting enough sleep and exercising and appropriate diets. That all will help our immune system to be strong, and so that we can fight this COVID-19. It is an all hands on deck. It's not just my responsibility or your responsibility. It is all of our responsibility. And we have to, in my mind, move beyond the politics of a mask, move beyond the politics of, you know, whether it's a conspiracy theory or they're injecting, you know, microchips in us and things of that nature, and really think about, am I my brother's keeper? What would the Good Samaritan do? What you do for the least of these, that kind of a mentality.
Yeah, that question that I've been liking to ask is that question of what does love require of us?
Yeah.
And I think that love and that kind of Christ-like love is, whether it comes to masks, and it's not to shame anybody or whatever, but it's just, hey, with masks, like, I think that love, that loving act, that good neighbor act, is to wear the mask.
Yeah.
And then I think maybe even with vaccines is part of that. And I understand people feeling nervous about that or feeling unsure. It's, you know, it's a new medication at some level, right? Like it's kind of thought in that way. But a lot of us, like, if you were really, really sick, you would want to take the new medication, right? And it's like, if your world is under this pandemic, you kind of want to take this this new thing. So I don't know. That's where I stand. Like I said, again, not as an expert, not as somebody that has a degree in those sorts of things, but I think that's a way that we can care for others.
What do you think from an ethical perspective? What is the church's role from an ethical perspective as it relates to this vaccine? Have you thought about that?
Yeah. Well, I do think even what we're doing right now is part of our ethical responsibility, is that we're talking about it, that we are trying to help people make a well-informed decision, not a politically motivated decision or a conspiracy theory informed decision, or just informed from your group of friends on social media or whatever, because there's a lot of that, and it gets to be kind of a, not a herd mentality, but a mob mentality on, that kind of, where you get that social media mob kind of thing. And I think that's just where you can get misinformation spread like wildfire. And, there might be, I'm sure there's people out there that are thinking like, well, you guys are misinformed or whatever. And that's like, hey, that's you're right. But what we're trying to do is go to these experts, have that conversation, read some good articles, good websites, that kind of, that sort of a thing. So I think ethically, to be well-informed, make a good, right decision that also is informed by those scriptural perspectives of loving your neighbor, and what does love require of us. And then I think, okay, you need to then make what you think is that best decision. But in my view, for me, it has been to get the vaccine feels like the ethically right decision for me to make.
Yeah. And I'm in the same place. And we'll bring up this last point and then we'll close our time together. And again, I think this has been one of the most valuable conversations we've had, is that Eric approached this topic from a perspective that was reflective of his experiences and his community. I approached it from that same perspective, which was different, but we ended up in the same place. That is amazing. And we knew that we came at it from different perspectives because the questions that we brought to the table had such different focuses. And it's funny, when you saw my questions, you were like, yeah. And I saw your questions, I was like, yeah. And my questions were like secondary questions for you, and your questions were like secondary questions to me. They were both important, and together we really were able to take what we thought were the most important questions and comments and concerns of our communities and lift that up. And I just want to say, for those who are still on, we're just better together, right? This conversation is incomplete without your perspective. It is incomplete without my perspective. It is incomplete without the collective whole coming together. And that's what I hope that these conversations will do, will bring us together, because we'll end up in the same place.
There you go.
Because we're better together.
That's good. I agree. We are better together. And that's a huge slogan for us. Like, we really believe in that. And I think too, even as, connected to our last couple conversations on race and all that, I think that if you are watching this and you are a white person, or you are not aware of some of the issues that have taken place within the African-American community with this, I think it's important to get informed. Like, I read that book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, this last year, and just kind of learned all about what was essentially stolen from her, and then even and Tuskegee as well. So if you don't know about these issues, I just want to tell people out there, like, Google these, research these, read some articles, get to know this, because I think it will help you have a better sort of respect and understanding of maybe even why some communities have a hesitancy when it comes to this. Because I was even just, I think within the maybe within like the white community, about 60% of people are willing to get the vaccine, yet it was only at 40% in the black community. So stuff like that, where like, okay, well, we got understand one another, right?
And we didn't even talk about the Hispanic community, right?
Right.
You know, there are people who are right here in Orange County, communities that are undocumented, that are afraid to get the vaccine. They want to, but they're afraid of ICE and they're afraid of being deported and so forth and so on. And so that group of people become a health risk because they want to get it, but they're afraid to. And they have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Not only because oftentimes undocumented communities live generationally in the same house, and they have work where they have to work in the community, and those jobs have been taken from them because of things that have closed down. So they're getting it economically, they're getting it from a health perspective, and then there's this emotional, psychological fear. And so we haven't even talked about that.
Exactly. You're right. And COVID has swept through at Calvary Church, has swept through our Hispanic community in far greater numbers than for anyone else. And it's been rough. And so you're right. So just, again, have an understanding, have a care, have a spirit and an attitude that wants to know what the experience is of someone different than you, and to just care for one another.
Just care for one another. I'm going to close with this final thought. The final thought is our goal is to bring inspiration, education to lead to transformation. And we want to make a difference with these conversations. And we have another one next month, and we'll let you know what that's all about. But Eric, my friend and my brother, thank you so much for being with us today. Any final words that you may have?
Well, if we could just put Pastor Ivan's little screen title, his name, across the bottom of the screen real quick, because what we don't want to do when it comes to COVID is nobody spits on each other, okay? Pastor Ivan spits. Don't follow Pastor Ivan. Don't spit. All right, that's our closing thought.
Ladies and gentlemen, we say thank you so much. And as I escort him out of my church, I'm going to lay hands on him. Amen. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you.